My stepson pushed me at the Christmas table and screamed that the seat belonged to his real dad. I fell to the ground in front of the whole family. The gravy boat shattered. My hips slammed against the hardwood floor. My grandchildren screamed. But as I lay there looking up at his sneering face and his wife's cold indifference, I did not cry. I simply realized that my wallet had been open for too long. What he did not know was that very night I would change his life forever. When he woke up the next morning, he found 33 missed calls and a life that was no longer his. I am Lionel Stone, 68 years old, and I have spent my entire life carrying things that were heavy. I founded Stone Logistics with a single second-hand truck and a back of steel. For 40 years, I hauled steel across state lines, slept in cabins freezing with ice, and ate cold sandwiches so that my family would never have to know what hunger felt like. I am a man of asphalt and diesel, but I polished myself up to fit into the world my late wife Esther wanted. I raised her son Terrence from the time he was 5 years old. I gave him my last name. I gave him a job. I gave him a life. But tonight, the weight on my shoulders is heavier than any cargo I have ever hauled. Before I tell you how I dismantled his world in a single night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the one giving everything only to receive nothing in return. The Chicago winter was unforgiving that night. The wind howled against the windshield of my old Ford F-150. My knees ached with that dull, throbbing pain that always comes when the temperature drops below zero. It was a reminder of the decades I spent jumping down from truck cabs, landing on concrete until my cartilage wore thin. I rubbed my left knee trying to generate some heat and looked up at the house. It was a mansion, really. A sprawling estate in the suburbs that I had paid for brick by brick. The windows glowed with warm golden light. A massive Christmas tree stood in the bay window, its ornaments sparkling like diamonds. It looked like a greeting card. It looked like a home. I took a deep breath, clutching the small velvet box in my pocket. Inside were 2 savings bonds for my twin grandchildren. This was the first Christmas without Esther. The silence in the passenger seat where she used to sit was deafening. I missed her laugh. I missed the way she would reach over and squeeze my hand when I got quiet. But I told myself that tonight would be all right. I still had family. I still had Terrence. I still had the twins. I was the patriarch now, and it was my duty to keep the tradition alive. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was gray, my face lined with the map of hard labor, but my eyes were steady. I was Lionel Stone. I was the Rock. I opened the truck door and stepped out into the biting wind, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my hip. I walked up the driveway past Terrence's brand new Porsche, a car that my company paid the lease on. I brushed the snow off my shoulders and unlocked the front door. The heat hit me instantly, carrying the scent of rosemary roasted turkey and expensive perfume. I stomped the snow off my work boots on the mat, trying to be careful. From the dining room, I heard the clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of jazz. I walked in, forcing a smile onto my face. Kimberly, my daughter-in-law, looked up from the table. She did not smile. She was a petite woman with sharp features and eyes that always seemed to be calculating the cost of everything she looked at. She scanned me from my boots to my flannel shirt, her nose wrinkling slightly as if she smelled something foul. "You are late, Lionel," she said, her voice tight, "and you are tracking slush onto the hardwood. We had the floors refinished just last week." I looked down. My boots were wet, but I was still on the rug. "I am sorry, Kim," I said, my voice raspy from the cold. "The roads were bad coming out of the distribution center. I had to make sure the drivers got their holiday bonuses before I left." Terrence was sitting at the side of the table, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. He was already drunk. His tie was loose and his face was flushed. He didn't stand up to greet me. He just swirled his drink and laughed. "Always the workhorse, right?" Lionel, Terrence sneered. "You own the company, but you still smell like diesel and cheap coffee. Go wash up. We have guests coming later. Important people. I don't want you embarrassing us looking like the help." The insult landed, but I let it slide. I had let insults slide for 30 years for the sake of peace. For the sake of Esther. I walked to the hallway bathroom, washed my hands with the lavender soap that smelled like money, and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was not the help. I was the source. But they had forgotten that. When I returned to the dining room, the food was already being served. No one had waited for me. The twins were busy with their iPads, barely acknowledging my presence. Kimberly was directing the hired server to pour more wine. The table was set beautifully with the finest china and silver cutlery. And there at the head of the table was the empty chair. It was a high-backed oak chair. I had built it myself in my wood shop 40 years ago. It was the only piece of furniture from my old life that I insisted on keeping. It was where the head of the household sat. It was where I had sat every Christmas since 1985. It was my seat. I walked toward it, my limp slightly more pronounced as the fatigue set in. I was ready to sit down, carve the turkey, and give the toast to Esther's memory. I placed my hand on the back of the chair. Suddenly, Terrence slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "Don't you dare!" he shouted. I froze. I looked at him confused. "Excuse me?" I asked. "That seat is not for you," Terrence spat, standing up. He swayed slightly, his eyes burning with a mix of alcohol and deep-seated resentment. "That is the chairman's seat. That is for the head of this family. And now that Mom is gone, that role belongs to me." I looked around the room. Kimberly was busy cutting her meat, pretending not to hear, but I saw the smirk playing on her lips. The twins looked up wide-eyed. "Terrence, sit down," I said calmly. "You are drunk. This is my house. This is my chair. It is Mom's house," he yelled, his voice cracking. "She is the one who made this family what it is. You were just the wallet. You were just the driver. You think because you paid the bills you are one of us. You are nothing but a glorified ATM." He walked around the table, coming face to face with me. He was taller than me, now younger, but soft. His hands had never held anything heavier than a golf club. I looked him in the eye. "I raised you, Terrence. I gave you my name when your own father ran off." "Don't you talk about my father," he screamed. "My father was a free spirit. You are just a bitter old man holding onto a checkbook. My dad is coming tonight. I invited him. And he is going to sit in that chair. So get out." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. He had invited Joe. The man who abandoned him, the man who beat Esther, the man I had spent a lifetime protecting him from. I tightened my grip on the chair. "No," I said. My voice was low, dangerous. "I am sitting here." Terrence laughed a cruel, ugly sound. Then without warning he shoved me. It wasn't a fight. It was a cowardly push against an old man with bad knees. I lost my balance. My boots slipped on the polished floor. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the horror on my granddaughter's face. I saw the chandelier swinging above. I felt gravity take hold. I crashed to the floor. My hip hit the wood with a sickening thud. The table shook and the gravy boat tipped over, spilling hot brown liquid all over the sleeve of my best jacket. Pain shot up my spine, white and blinding. I lay there stunned. The room went silent. Terrence stood over me, panting, his fists clenched. He looked like a giant from my vantage point on the floor. "I told you to move," he muttered, though his voice wavered slightly. I looked at Kimberly. Surely she would help. Surely she would have some decency. She stood up, napkin in hand. She looked at me, then at the gravy spreading on the rug. "Great," she sighed. "That is a Persian rug, Lionel. You made a mess." She did not offer a hand. She did not ask if I was hurt. She turned to the server. "Can you clean this up before the other guests arrive? It smells greasy." The pain in my hip was throbbing, but the coldness in my heart was absolute. I looked at the ceiling. I thought of Esther. I thought of the promise I made to her on her deathbed to take care of them. And in that moment, lying in the gravy, looked down upon by the people who lived off my sweat, I realized something. I had kept my promise. I had taken care of them. But I never promised to let them destroy me. I rolled onto my side, groaning as I pushed myself up. My arm trembled. No one moved to help. The twins started to cry, but Kimberly shushed them. "Stop it," she hissed at the kids. "Grandpa is fine. He is just being dramatic." I got to one knee, then the other. I used the edge of the table to pull myself up to a standing position. My suit was ruined. My dignity was bruised. But my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I did not scream. I did not strike back. I did not curse. I reached into my pocket, took out the velvet box with the savings bonds, and placed it gently on the table next to the cranberry sauce. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded like the engine of my truck, reliable and unshakable. I turned my back on them. "Where are you going?" Terrence shouted, his bravado wavering as the reality of what he had done started to sink in. "We have guests coming. You can't just leave. Who is going to pay for the caterer?" I kept walking. I walked past the Christmas tree. I walked past the family photos on the mantle that showed a lie I had believed for too long. I walked to the heavy oak front door. I opened it, and the cold wind welcomed me like an old friend. I stepped out into the night. Lionel Terrence yelled from the dining room, "Don't you walk away from me. You need us. You are just a lonely old man without us." I closed the door. The latch clicked shut. It was a small sound, sharp and final, like the hammer of a gun being cocked. I walked to my truck, ignoring the limp. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The heater roared to life. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Terrence in the window watching me. He looked angry. He looked entitled. He thought this was just another fight. He thought I would be back in the morning with my checkbook and an apology. He was wrong. I drove down the winding driveway, leaving the mansion behind in the rearview mirror. I did not turn toward my apartment. Instead, I turned toward downtown Chicago. I was going to the one place where emotions didn't matter, only facts. I was going to the office. I reached for my phone on the dashboard. I did not call Terrence. I did not call Kimberly. I dialed a number I had not used on a holiday in 10 years. "This is the bank's automated fraud and theft line," the robotic voice answered. I drove with one hand, my eyes fixed on the snowy road ahead. "Connect me to the emergency asset freezing department," I said to the voice system. The night was just beginning, and so was the lesson. The silence in the hotel room was heavier than the snow falling outside. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at the pristine white sheets that smelled of industrial bleach and loneliness. It was a stark contrast to the warmth of the home I had just left, but it was also cleaner. Here there were no lies. Here there was only me and the throbbing pain in my hip. I slowly unbuttoned my shirt and walked to the full-length mirror. The reflection showed an old man with gray hair and tired eyes, but what drew my gaze was the bruise forming on my side. It was dark and angry, spreading across my skin like spilled ink. It was the physical manifestation of my stepson's gratitude. I touched it gently and winced. The physical pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. My mind drifted back 25 years. I remembered the day I met Esther. She was crying at her kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of overdue bills. Terrence was just a boy then, sitting on the floor playing with a broken toy truck. He looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes. His biological father had left them with nothing but debt and bruises. I stepped in. I did not just pay the bills. I paid for the peace of mind. I paid for the toy truck to be replaced with a real bicycle. I taught that boy how to ride. I ran behind him, holding the seat until my lungs burned, promising him I would never let him fall. I remembered his smile that day. It was genuine. It was the smile of a boy who felt safe. I walked back to the bed and sat down heavily. Where had that boy gone? When did the child I carried on my shoulders turn into the man who pushed me to the floor? I realized then with a clarity that cut like a knife that they never loved me. They loved the safety I provided. They loved the shield I held over their heads. I was not a father or a husband to them. I was a utility. I was the electricity that kept the lights on and the heat running. And just like electricity, you only notice it when it cuts out. I looked at the bruise again. It was a receipt. It was the final invoice for 30 years of unrequited love. The realization did not make me cry. It made me cold. It turned my heart into the stone that matches my name. I reached for my leather satchel and pulled out my laptop. I did not turn on the television. I did not order room service. I had work to do. The screen glowed blue in the dim room, illuminating the lines on my face. I logged into the Stone Logistics corporate banking portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. These were the hands that had steered 18-wheelers through ice storms. These were the hands that had signed payroll checks for hundreds of families. Tonight they were the hands of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. I navigated to the personal expense accounts. I had set these up years ago, giving Terrence and Kimberly authorized user status on my Black American Express card. It was meant for emergencies and household necessities. I clicked on the transaction history. The list scrolled down the screen like a testament to their greed. $5,000 for a handbag, $1,200 for a spa day, $800 for a dinner at a steakhouse just 2 nights ago. There were thousands of dollars in cash advances at local casinos. I watched the numbers blur. I had ignored this for too long. I had told myself they were grieving. I had told myself they were young. But looking at the bruise on my hip, I knew I was just making excuses for parasites. I took a deep breath. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt efficient. I clicked on the tab for authorized users. Next to the name Terrence Stone, there was a green button that said active. I moved the cursor. I clicked. The screen refreshed. The status changed to revoked. I did the same for Kimberly. Revoked. I went to the checking accounts, the joint account I shared with Esther, which Terrence had access to after her death. I transferred the entire balance of $200,000 into my personal holding company account. I left exactly $100 in the joint account. Enough for a taxi ride, but not enough for dignity. I was not done. I picked up my phone. It was 3 in the morning, but I knew Frank would answer. Frank was the head of security at my company. We had driven trucks together in the 80s. He was loyal to the bone. Frank answered on the second ring. "Boss, is everything all right?" "I need you to do something for me, Frank," I said, my voice steady. "I need you to remotely reset the gate codes for the estate, and I need you to flag Terrence's security badge as stolen." There was a pause on the other end. Frank did not ask why. He knew me. He knew I did not make calls like this unless the world was ending. "Consider it done," Lionel Frank said. "Do you want me to send a patrol car to the house?" "No," I said. "Let them sleep. They are going to need their rest for tomorrow." I hung up. I closed the laptop. The room was dark again. I lay back on the pillows, staring at the ceiling. I imagined the scene at the restaurant where they were likely still partying. I imagined Terrence laughing, raising a glass of expensive scotch, thinking he had finally won, thinking the old man was out of the picture. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had already crumbled. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming. The sun woke me up, cutting through the heavy curtains. It was a bright, cold Chicago morning. I felt stiff. My hip throbbed with a dull rhythm. I sat up and reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen was lit up with notifications. 33 missed calls, 14 text messages, 9 voicemails. I put on my reading glasses and unlocked the phone. The first few messages were from late last night around the time I was clicking the mouse. "Hey Dad, the card is not working. Call the bank." "Lionel, this is embarrassing. The waiter says the card is declined. Pick up the phone." Then the tone shifted. The messages from an hour later were angry. "Are you serious right now? You cut us off. We have guests here, Lionel. Fix this." Then came the panic. The messages from this morning. "Dad, please pick up. The Uber account is linked to your card and we cannot get a ride home. Lionel, are you at the hotel? We need to talk." I scrolled through them, my face impassive. I listened to one voicemail. It was Terrence. His voice was slurred, panic rising in his throat. "Dad, look, I am sorry about the push, okay? It was an accident. I was drunk. But you cannot do this. The bill is $4,000. They are threatening to call the police. You have to turn the card back on, just for tonight, please." I deleted the voicemail. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel joy. I felt the grim resolve of a man who finally respects himself enough to say enough. I opened the text thread. I typed a single word. "No." I hit send. Then I powered off the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. Below me, the city of Chicago was waking up. People were rushing to work. Trucks were moving on the highway. My trucks. Stone Logistics trucks. I watched one of my trailers merge onto the expressway, the logo painted proudly on the side. That was my legacy. That was my name. And I was going to take it back. I showered and dressed, putting on the fresh suit I had packed in my emergency bag. I tied my tie with precision. I looked in the mirror one last time. The sad old man from last night was gone. In his place stood the chairman. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The elevator ride down was smooth. The lobby was bustling with businessmen and tourists. I walked out to the valet stand. The attendant brought my truck around. It looked out of place among the luxury sedans, but I did not care. It was paid for. It was mine. I climbed in and checked the time. It was 9 in the morning. The banks were opening. The lawyers were arriving at their offices. The war had officially begun. I started the engine. The rumble of the motor felt good. It felt like power. I pulled out into traffic, not heading back to the house, but heading to the one place Terrence thought he owned. I was going to the headquarters. As I drove, I thought about the 33 missed calls. 33 times he reached out only when he needed money. 33 times he panicked because his lifeline was cut. Not once did he call to ask if I was okay. Not once did he call to say sorry for the pain he caused. That was all the confirmation I needed. I turned on the radio. Jazz filled the cab. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. "Let them walk home in the snow," I said aloud to the empty truck. "It is time they learned how cold the world really is." The morning sun reflected off the hood of the silver Porsche 911 as it tore down the industrial access road. I watched from the window of my corner office on the second floor. From this height, the car looked like a shiny toy racing toward a wall of concrete. Inside that car was Terrence. He was driving the vehicle my company leased for him to impress clients, but he mostly used it to impress valet drivers at nightclubs. He was speeding. I could tell by the way the dust kicked up behind the tires that he was angry. He was coming to claim his throne. He was coming to demand that the old man sign the checks and go back to being a silent ghost in his own life. But the ghost had left the building. I turned away from the window and adjusted my cufflinks. For the first time in years, I was not wearing my company polo shirt or the flannel button-downs I favored for comfort. Today, I was wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit tailored on Savile Row. It was a suit I bought 10 years ago for a merger meeting and had not worn since. It fit a little looser now, but it still commanded respect. I looked at the mirror. The man looking back was not the stepfather who cooked turkeys and signed birthday cards. This was the chairman. This was the man who negotiated contracts with steel unions and survived recessions. I picked up the thick manila envelope from my desk. It contained the forensic accounting report I had compiled overnight. It was heavy. Down below, the Porsche screeched to a halt in front of the main security gate. The gate was a massive structure of reinforced steel topped with barbed wire. It was designed to keep thieves out of a yard filled with millions of dollars in cargo. Today, it was keeping a thief out of the executive suite. I watched on the security monitor as Terrence rolled down his window. He did not use the keypad. He slammed his hand on the horn. The sound echoed through the yard, startling a few drivers who were inspecting their rigs. "Open the gate!" Frank Terrence screamed. His voice was distorted by the external microphone, but the entitlement was crystal clear. Frank stepped out of the guard booth. Frank was 70 years old. We served in the same unit in the Army before I hired him as my first employee. He had a bad leg and a heart of gold, but he did not suffer fools. He walked slowly to the driver's side of the Porsche. "Good morning, Terrence," Frank said calmly. His breath puffed in the cold air. "Cut the pleasantries," Frank Terrence spat. "The card reader is broken. Open the gate manually. I have a meeting with the finance department in 5 minutes." Frank shook his head slowly. He adjusted his cap. "The reader is not broken, son. Your access has been denied." Terrence laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous bark. "Denied. Do you know who I am? I own this place. My mother built this company. Now open the gate before I fire you and take your pension." Frank leaned in. His face was like granite. "Your mother did not build this company, Terrence. Lionel did, and my pension is secured by a trust you cannot touch. Now turn this car around. You are blocking the entrance for the working men." Terrence went red. He revved the engine aggressively. "I am not moving. I am calling the police." "Call them," Frank said. "I already did. They are on their way to collect the company vehicle you are sitting in. It was reported stolen an hour ago." While Terrence was screaming at Frank, a second car pulled up behind the Porsche. It was a white Range Rover. Kimberly stepped out. She was dressed in a pristine white coat that cost more than Frank made in a month. She held her phone up high, the camera lens pointed directly at the guard booth. She was live streaming. I watched the screen as she adopted her stage persona. Her face twisted into a mask of tragic suffering. "Hello everyone," she said to her followers. "I am shaking right now. We are at my late mother-in-law's company, the company she poured her soul into. And look at this. The security guard is refusing to let her son in. My husband is being barred from his own legacy by his stepfather." She walked closer to the gate, panning the camera to show the trucks and the workers gathering in the yard. "This is what abuse looks like, guys," she continued, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Lionel Stone has locked us out. He cut off our credit cards in the middle of the night, leaving us stranded. And now he is holding our inheritance hostage. We just want to work. We just want to honor Mom. But he is a tyrant." The workers in the yard began to murmur. These were men and women I had known for years. They drove my trucks. They loaded my warehouses. They knew me. But Kimberly was persuasive. She knew how to weaponize tears. She pointed the camera at a young driver. "You there," she called out. Do you think it is fair that the founder's son is being treated like a criminal? The driver looked down, shifting his feet uncomfortably. He did not want to get involved. See, Kimberly said, turning back to the phone. Everyone is afraid of him. Lionel is a monster. He pushed me last night. He physically assaulted me at Christmas dinner because I asked him to pass the salt. And now this. Please share this video. We need justice. My blood ran cold. The lie was so effortless. She was destroying my reputation in real time, painting me as a violent, senile old man. I could feel the anger rising, but I pushed it down. Anger is a fire that burns the house down. I needed ice. I walked out of my office and headed for the stairs. I did not take the elevator. I wanted to walk through the lobby. I wanted every employee to see me. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the main entrance, the cold wind hit me, but I did not shiver. I walked straight toward the gate. My polished shoes crunched on the gravel. The employees parted like the Red Sea. They saw the suit. They saw the look in my eyes. The murmurs stopped. The yard went silent except for the hum of idling diesel engines. Kimberly saw me coming. She gasped theatrically and pointed the phone at me. "There he is," she shrieked. "There is the man who stole our future. Lionel, how can you look at yourself in the mirror?" I did not look at the phone. I did not look at Kimberly. I walked past her as if she were a ghost. I stopped in front of the Porsche. Terrence was still inside, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. When he saw me, he rolled down the window further. Finally, he shouted, "Tell this idiot to open the gate. We are wasting time." "Get out of the car, Terrence," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried across the silent yard. "Excuse me?" Terrence said, his jaw dropping. I said, "Get out of the car," I repeated, "and give the keys to Frank." "You are joking, right?" Terrence laughed nervously. He looked at the camera Kimberly was holding, trying to regain his confidence. "You are trying to humiliate me in front of the staff. This is a power trip. You are old Lionel. You are confused. Go back to bed." I pulled the envelope from under my arm. I opened the flap and pulled out a single document. It was a bank transfer record. December 14th, I read aloud. Transfer of $25,000 from the Stone Logistics Maintenance Fund to a private account under the name T. Stone Consulting. Terrence went pale. December 20th. I continued. $12,000 charged to the corporate fuel account for a vacation rental in Aspen. Kimberly lowered the phone slightly. Her eyes darted back and forth. January 2nd, I said, my voice rising just enough to be heard by the drivers standing nearby. $50,000 withdrawn from the driver pension surplus fund. A gasp went through the crowd. The drivers stepped closer. Their confusion was gone. Now they looked angry. Pension money was sacred. "That is a lie," Terrence stammered. "That is an accounting error." "I can explain. It is embezzlement," I said, cutting him off. "It is theft. And I have the digital footprints to prove it. I have sent this file to the district attorney this morning." Terrence opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Kimberly for help, but she was already backing away, hiding the phone behind her back. I stepped closer to the car. I leaned down so our faces were inches apart. "You said that chair belonged to you, Terrence. You said you were the head of this family. Well, the head of this family does not steal from the men and women who bleed for this company." I straightened up and looked at Frank. Frank opened the gate. Frank hit the button. The steel barrier lifted with a mechanical groan. Terrence smiled weakly. "See," he said, "I knew you were bluffing. I knew you would not do it." He reached for the gear shift. "You are fired, Terrence," I said. He froze. "You are fired for cause," I continued. "You are stripped of your title. You are banned from these premises. And if you are not out of that car in 30 seconds, I will let the drivers discuss their pension fund with you directly." I gestured to the group of large men in uniform standing behind me. They were cracking their knuckles. They looked ready to have a conversation. Terrence scrambled out of the car. He tripped over his own feet, nearly falling into the snow. He threw the keys at Frank. "You are crazy!" he screamed, backing away. "You will regret this. I will sue you for everything." "Get off my property," I said. Kimberly grabbed his arm. "Come on," she hissed. "Stop talking. We need to call a lawyer." They retreated toward her Range Rover. The walk of shame was long. The employees watched them go with stone-cold faces. No one waved. No one said goodbye. As they peeled out of the driveway, throwing gravel everywhere, I turned to the workers. "I apologize for the disturbance," I said. "The money has been returned to the pension fund from my personal savings. No one will lose a dime." Now let us get back to work. I handed the keys to Frank. Park this in the garage, I said. And Frank, yes, boss, Frank said, smiling. Get that gate fixed. I do not want any more rats getting in. I turned and walked back toward the building. The suit felt good. The cold air felt good. I was alone again, but for the first time in a long time, I felt clean. The chairman was back in his seat, and I had a war to win. The conference room in the law offices of Althea Sharp smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. It was a scent designed to intimidate, but Terrence and Kimberly were too arrogant to notice. They sat on the opposite side of the massive mahogany table looking like vultures waiting to pick the meat off a carcass. I sat next to Althea. I did not look at them. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the gray Chicago skyline. It was snowing again. The city looked cold and unforgiving, but it was nothing compared to the temperature inside this room. Althea Sharp was a woman who lived up to her name. She was 60 years old, with skin the color of deep obsidian and eyes that could cut glass. She sat with her hands folded on top of a thick red file folder. She was silent. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. She knew that in negotiation, the first person to speak is usually the one who loses. Terrence was the one who broke. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the water pitcher tremble. "Stop wasting our time," he shouted. "We know the law. My mother was married to Lionel for 30 years. That means half of everything he owns belongs to her estate. And since I am her only son, that means it belongs to me." Kimberly chimed in, her voice shrill and demanding. She pulled a piece of paper from her designer bag. It was a printout from a legal advice website. According to the state of Illinois marital property statutes, she read smugly, all assets acquired during the marriage are subject to division. Stone Logistics is worth millions. The house is worth $3 million. We want our share. And we want it now, or we go to the press and tell them how you are cheating a grieving orphan. I finally turned to look at them. An orphan. Terrence was a 35-year-old man wearing a watch that cost more than my first truck. He was not an orphan. He was a parasite who had finally run out of hosts. Althea slowly turned her head. She looked at Terrence over the rim of her glasses. "Are you finished?" she asked. Her voice was low and smooth like velvet wrapped around a brick. "No, I am not finished," Terrence spat. "I want a forensic audit of the company. I want to know how much cash the old man is hiding. And I want the keys to the lake house. Mom loved that place. It is rightfully mine." Althea sighed. It was a sound of pure boredom. She opened the red file folder. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was the only noise in the room. "Let us clarify a few things, Mr. Stone," Althea said. She did not call him Terrence. She gave him the respect of a surname he did not deserve. She slid a document across the table. It was yellowed with age, protected by a plastic sleeve. "This is the incorporation document for Stone Logistics," Althea said. "Please look at the date at the bottom." Terrence grabbed the paper. He squinted at it. "August 4th, 1980, he read. "So what?" Althea slid another document across. "This is the marriage certificate between Lionel Stone and Esther Williams. Please read the date. June 10th, 1995. Terrence read. He paused, his brow furrowed. Althea leaned forward. "Do the math, Terrence. Lionel founded the company 15 years before he married your mother. It is considered premarital property. It is a separate asset. Your mother never owned a single share. She never sat on the board. She was never an employee. The company belongs 100% to Lionel Stone." Terrence dropped the paper. "That is a technicality," he stammered. "She supported him. She raised me while he was on the road. That counts for something." "It counts for gratitude," Althea said coldly, "not for equity." Kimberly jumped in, desperate to find a loophole. "What about the house? They lived there together. That is definitely marital property. We want half the value of the mansion." Althea smiled. It was a smile that did not reach her eyes. She pulled out a deed. It was old and crinkled. "Lionel bought the land and built the house in 1990, Althea said. 5 years before the marriage. The deed is in his name only. Your mother moved in after the wedding. She never contributed a cent to the mortgage because there was no mortgage. Lionel paid cash." The room went silent. I watched the blood drain from Kimberly's face. The millions she had already spent in her head were evaporating like steam. But Terrence whispered. "But Mom had money. She always had money. She bought new cars. She went to Paris. She had jewelry. Where did that money come from?" I closed my eyes. This was the part I had dreaded. I had spent 30 years protecting Terrence from the truth about his mother. I wanted him to remember her as a saint. I wanted him to believe she was the elegant, successful woman she pretended to be, but he had forced my hand. He had pushed me down, and now I had to push back with the truth. Althea looked at me. I nodded. She turned over a new stack of papers. These were not old documents. These were credit card statements, bank overdraft notices, loan applications. Your mother did not have money, Terence, Althea said softly. Your mother had a problem. Terence picked up the top sheet. His hands were shaking. What is this? He asked. It is a shopping addiction, Althea said. Your mother spent money she did not have to buy affection she did not feel. She bought clothes she never wore. She bought gifts she could not afford. She gambled online. I spoke up for the first time. My voice sounded raspy. I paid them, Terence. Every month for 30 years I paid her bills. I paid off her secret credit cards. I paid the bookies. I paid the boutiques. I did it because I loved her. And I did it because I did not want you to know that your mother was drowning. Terence shook his head. No. You are lying. She was a queen. She was a queen with a crown made of debt, I said. Althea pointed to the final document in the file. This is the current financial standing of Esther Stone's estate, Althea said. Since she had no ownership in the company and no name on the house deed, her estate consists entirely of her personal bank accounts and her personal debts. Kimberly grabbed the paper. Her eyes scanned the bottom line. She gasped. -$50,000, Kimberly screeched. How can she have negative money? Because Althea explained Lionel stopped paying her bills the day she died. The debt is in her name. It is a platinum credit card with a $50,000 balance. Althea closed the folder. The sound was final, like a coffin lid slamming shut. So here is the situation, Althea said, folding her hands again. There is no inheritance. There is no house. There is no stock option. The only thing Esther left you is a $50,000 debt to American Express. Terence looked at me. His eyes were wide with shock and horror. He looked like the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders, but the innocence was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of greed. You have to pay it, Terence whispered. You always paid it. You are her husband. I stood up. My hip ached, but I stood tall. I buttoned my jacket. I was her husband, I said, and I honored my vows until death did us part. But I am not your ATM, Terence. I am not your safety net anymore. I walked toward the door. Wait, Kimberly yelled. You cannot just leave us with this. We signed a contract for a renovation on our condo. We need money. We are family. I stopped with my hand on the brass doorknob. I did not turn around. Family does not push family down in front of guests, I said. Family does not call their father a driver and a wallet. But the debt, Terence cried out. They will sue the estate. They will take her jewelry. Then let them take it, I said. I opened the door. The noise of the busy office outside rushed in, breaking the suffocating atmosphere of the room. One more thing, Althea added from her chair. Her voice was cheerful now. Since you filed a frivolous claim against my client, you will be receiving a bill for my hourly rate today. My services are $500 an hour, and we have been here for 2 hours. I walked out. I walked past the reception desk. I walked to the elevator. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not happiness. It was lighter than that. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being dropped after a long march. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I saw Terence and Kimberly still sitting at the table, staring at the red folder, as if it were a bomb that had just detonated in their faces. They had come looking for gold. They dug a hole and fell into it. I checked my watch. It was lunchtime. I was hungry. For the first time in years, I was going to eat a meal that I did not have to pay for with my dignity. I took out my phone. I had one more stop to make today. The war was not over. They would come back. Greed always comes back. But next time, they would not just face a lawyer. They would face the consequences of using my grandchildren as weapons. I dialed the number for the private school where the twins were enrolled. Hello, I said. This is Lionel Stone. I would like to speak to the billing department regarding the tuition for next semester. The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft chime. The doors opened. I stepped out into the world a man with no wife, no son, and no burden, and it felt good. The engine of my truck idled with a low rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my hands. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. For 10 years, this had been the highlight of my week. Tuesday was the day I picked up my grandchildren from the private academy that cost more than my first house. I sat in the line of luxury SUVs feeling out of place in my work truck, but I never cared. I lived for the moment the double doors opened and those 2 little faces searched the crowd for me. I lived for the way they would run past the Teslas and the Mercedes to climb into the cab of my Ford asking if I had brought them peppermint candies. I inched forward in the pickup line. I checked the rearview mirror to make sure my face was clean. I had scrubbed the grease off my hands before leaving the warehouse. I wanted to look presentable. I wanted to hear about their science projects and their spelling bees. I wanted to forget about lawyers and forensic audits for just 1 hour. I pulled up to the curb. The school principal, Mr. Henderson, was standing there with a clipboard. He usually waved at me. We had chatted many times about baseball and the weather. He knew I was the one who signed the tuition checks. He knew I was the one who donated to the new gymnasium fund. But today Mr. Henderson did not wave. He looked down at his clipboard. He looked nervous. I rolled down the window. "Good afternoon, Mr. Henderson," I said, smiling. "I am here for the twins." He walked over to the truck slowly. He did not make eye contact. He placed a hand on the door frame. "Mr. Stone," he said quietly, "I am afraid I cannot release the children to you today." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean? Is everything all right? Are they sick?" "No, they are fine," Mr. Henderson said. He looked over his shoulder. "But we received an updated custodial directive this morning. Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Kimberly Stone, sent over a legal document. It specifically removes you from the approved pickup list. It states that you are a threat to the emotional well-being of the children." The air left my lungs. A threat. Me, the man who sat by their beds when they had the flu because their parents were at a gala. The man who taught them how to tie their shoes. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice trembling. "I am their grandfather. I pay for this school." "I know," Mr. Henderson said, and his voice was filled with genuine pity. "I know you do, Lionel. But my hands are tied. If I release them to you, the school could be liable for kidnapping charges." She was very specific. She threatened to call the police if you stepped onto the campus. Just then, the double doors opened. A stream of children in navy blue uniforms poured out. I saw them, my twin grandchildren, Leo and Maya. They were holding hands looking around the parking lot. Leo saw my truck. His face lit up. He pointed. He started to run toward me. Mr. Henderson stepped back and signaled to a teacher. The teacher grabbed Leo by the shoulder. She whispered something in his ear. Leo stopped. He looked confused. He looked at me, then he looked at the teacher. He started to cry. "Let me talk to them," I pleaded, "just for a minute, just to explain." "You have to go, Lionel," Mr. Henderson said firmly. "Please, do not make a scene in front of the students. If you stay, I have to call security." I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I watched Maya wipe a tear from her cheek. She waved at me a small, sad wave. I wanted to get out of the truck. I wanted to tear down the gates. But I knew that was exactly what Kimberly wanted. She wanted me to lose my temper. She wanted footage of the crazy old man scaring the children. I nodded to Mr. Henderson. I put the truck in gear. I drove away. I watched them in the side mirror until they disappeared, shrinking into small blue dots. I had never felt so small in my entire life. I drove 2 blocks and pulled into a side street. I turned off the engine and put my head in my hands. I sat there for 20 minutes, breathing in the smell of old coffee and diesel, trying to keep my heart from breaking. Then my phone rang. The screen showed a picture of Kimberly. It was a photo from her wedding day, smiling like an angel. I stared at it. I knew why she was calling. I swiped the green button. I did not say hello. Kimberly's voice filled the cab. It was sweet. It was sickly sweet, like rotting fruit. "Did you have a nice trip to the school, Lionel?" she asked. "You are evil," I said. My voice was low. "You are using children as pawns. I am protecting my family," she said, her tone shifting instantly to ice. "You seem to think you can cut off our livelihood and still enjoy the benefits of being a grandpa. It does not work that way. You want access, you pay the toll." "The toll," I repeated. "Tuition is due next week, Lionel," she said casually. $50,000 for the spring semester, plus the fees for the ski trip. I noticed you canceled the automatic transfer. I closed my eyes. So, this was the game. I assume you want to see them again, she continued. Leo has a soccer game on Saturday. Maya has a recital. It would be a shame if you missed those moments. They grow up so fast. Are you blackmailing me with my own grandchildren, I asked. I am negotiating, she said. You turn the credit cards back on. You pay the tuition. You drop this ridiculous investigation into the company accounts. You do that and I will put your name back on the list. I might even let you take them for ice cream. I listened to her breathing on the other end. She sounded confident. She thought she had found my breaking point. She thought that my love for those kids was a weakness she could exploit. I will think about it, I said. Do not think too long, she replied. The late fee kicks in tomorrow. And Lionel, if the check does not clear by noon, I will tell the kids that you did not want to pay for them to go to school anymore. I will tell them you chose your money over their education. Imagine how much they will hate you then. She hung up. I sat in the silence of the truck. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dashboard. I felt nauseous. The $50,000 was nothing to me. I could write that check right now. It would be the easiest thing in the world to pay her off and get my Tuesday afternoons back. But then I thought about Terrence. I thought about how I had bailed him out of every mistake he ever made. I thought about how I shielded him from consequences. And I looked at where that got us. It created a monster who pushed me down at dinner. If I paid Kimberly now, I was not helping those kids. I was teaching them that love is a transaction. I was teaching them that you can hurt people and still get what you want if you squeeze hard enough. I started the truck again. I did not drive home. I drove to Althea's office. Althea was still at her desk when I walked in. She took one look at my face and poured me a glass of water. She banned me from the school, I said, sitting down heavily. I expected that, Althea said. It is the standard move in a high-conflict divorce, even though you are not the one divorcing her. She is leveraging the only asset she has left. She wants $50,000 for tuition, I said. Or I never see them again. Althea leaned back in her chair. She studied me. What do you want to do, Lionel? She asked. I want to pay it, I admitted. I want to see them, Althea. They are innocent. They are the only good thing in this mess. Althea nodded. If you pay it, you lose. Not the money. You lose the war. And you lose those kids to her way of thinking. If you pay, you prove that you are just a wallet. But they will get kicked out, I said. They love that school. Then let their parents explain why, Althea said sharply. Let Terrence explain why he cannot pay for his own children. Let Kimberly explain why she spent the tuition money on handbags. She will tell them it is my fault, I said. Althea leaned forward. Children are smart, Lionel. They see more than you think. And eventually they will ask questions. If you save them now, you are really just saving Kimberly. You are paying for her to keep abusing you. I looked at the water in the glass. It was trembling because my hand was shaking. Althea was right. I had spent a lifetime being the safety net. But a safety net does not just catch people, it also traps them. It prevents them from learning how to fly. I took a deep breath. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was different now. It was the pain of a bone setting. It hurt, but it was necessary for healing. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the school finance office. This is the bursar, Mrs. Gable speaking. Hello, Mrs. Gable, this is Lionel Stone, I said. Oh, hello, Mr. Stone. We were just about to call you regarding the spring semester invoice. Yes, I said. I am calling to inform you that I will not be covering the tuition for Leo and Maya Stone this term. Please send the invoice directly to their parents, Terrence and Kimberly Stone. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Stone, Mrs. Gable said hesitantly, you have always paid. You know the policy. If payment is not received by Friday, the students will be administratively withdrawn. They will lose their spots. I know the policy, I said, and I hope their parents value education enough to find the money. But my sponsorship has ended. I hung up. I looked at Althea. She nodded. You did the right thing, she said. It feels like I just cut off my own arm, I said. You did not cut off your arm, Althea said softly. You just handed the weight back to the people who were supposed to be carrying it all along. I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled out my phone again. I needed to send one message to Kimberly. I needed her to know that the Bank of Lionel was closed forever. I typed the message slowly, my fingers feeling heavy. You banned me from the school because you said I was a threat. Since I am not a guardian, I should not be paying guardian expenses. The tuition is your responsibility. If you want them to stay in that school, you better sell some of those purses. Good luck." I hit send. I stared out at the city lights. I imagined Leo and Maya at home wondering why Grandpa didn't come. It broke my heart. But I knew that one day, when they were old enough to understand the value of $1 and the value of respect, they would understand. I was not abandoning them. I was waiting for them. I was keeping the chair empty until they were strong enough to sit in it without pushing anyone else down. Until then, I would fight. And I would win. I did not need a private investigator to tell me what my stepson was doing. I simply had to open Instagram. Terrence had blocked me, of course, but the internet is a public place, and screenshots travel fast. 3 days after I cut off the tuition payments, Terrence played his ace card. Or at least he thought it was an ace. In reality, he had just drawn a suicide card. He posted a photo of himself standing in front of a dilapidated housing project on the south side. His arm was draped around a man who looked like he had been chewed up and spit out by life. The caption read, "Finally reunited with my real father. The blood of a king. Welcome home, Dad." I stared at the photo on my tablet. The man in the picture was Joe. I had not seen Joe in 30 years, not since the night I stood between him and Esther while he tried to hit her with a lamp. Joe was not a king. Joe was a tornado of bad decisions and cheap whiskey. He had abandoned Terrence when the boy was 5, leaving them with nothing but bruises and debt. But Terrence did not remember the bruises. He only remembered the fantasy. He remembered the lie he told himself that his father was a free spirit who had been driven away by the boring, stable truck driver. I zoomed in on Joe's face. His eyes were yellowed. His skin was gray. He was wearing a jacket that was too big for him, and he was looking at Terrence's watch, not his son's face. I knew exactly what was happening. Terrence had gone down to the old neighborhood and flashed his money. He promised Joe the good life. He brought him back to the mansion to prove a point to me. He wanted to show me that I was replaceable. He wanted to show the world that the Stone family was better off without Lionel. I set the tablet down on my coffee table. I took a sip of my tea. The house was quiet. For the first time in a week, I felt a smile touch my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man watching a thief try to steal a bag of rattlesnakes. Terrence had invited the devil into paradise. The chaos began almost immediately. I heard about it through the grapevine. My old housekeeper Maria still worked at the mansion. She called me in tears 2 days after Joe moved in. She told me the house smelled like an ashtray. Kimberly had a strict rule about no smoking inside. She used to make me change my clothes in the garage if I had been near a campfire. But Joe did not care about rules. Joe sat on the white Italian leather sofa and smoked unfiltered cigarettes, putting them out in the crystal saucers of Esther's antique tea set. Maria told me that Joe had found the liquor cabinet. Terrence had stocked it with thousands of dollars of rare scotch and cognac to impress his friends. Joe drank it like it was water. He did not appreciate the age or the blend. He just wanted the burn. By the 3rd night, he was stumbling through the hallways, screaming at ghosts. He broke a vase that Esther had brought back from Italy. It shattered into a million pieces. When Kimberly complained, Joe laughed at her. He told her she was too uptight. He told her she needed to learn how to serve a man properly. The dynamic in the house shifted violently. Terrence had brought Joe in to be a prop, a symbol of his independence. But Joe refused to be a prop. Joe took over. He demanded steak for breakfast. He demanded that Terrence drive him to the track to bet on horses. When Terrence tried to say no, Joe played the guilt card. He told Terrence that he owed him for all the years they were apart. He told Terrence that a real son takes care of his father. Terrence, trapped by his own public narrative, could not say no. He had just introduced this man to the world as his hero. He could not kick him out now without looking like a fraud. Then things got darker. Joe began to turn his attention to Kimberly. He made comments about her clothes. He stared at her too long when she walked into the room. He told Terrence that he had done well catching a woman with such expensive taste. Kimberly was terrified. She was a woman who was used to controlling everything. She controlled Terrence. She controlled the staff. She tried to control me. But she could not control Joe. Joe was raw chaos. He did not care about social standing or manners. He walked around the house in his underwear, scratching himself and leaving wet towels on the hardwood floors. The breaking point came on a Saturday night. Terrence had planned a dinner party to show off his new happy family dynamic to a few investors he was trying to woo. He wanted to prove that the Stone brand was still strong despite my departure. He dressed Joe in one of my old suits that he had found in the closet. The suit did not fit. Joe looked like a scarecrow stuffed into a tuxedo. According to Maria, the dinner was a disaster. Joe got drunk before the appetizers were served. He started telling stories about his time in prison, glorifying violence and crime. The investors looked uncomfortable. They checked their watches. Then Joe turned on Kimberly. He made a crude joke about her body in front of the guests. Kimberly stood up, her face burning with humiliation. She told Joe to stop. Joe slammed his hand on the table. It was the same move Terrence had used on me, but with much more violence behind it. "Do not talk to me like that little girl," Joe roared. "I am the man of this house now. You show some respect." Terrence sat there, frozen. He looked at his biological father, the man he had idolized, and he finally saw the truth. He saw the monster I had protected him from, but he did nothing. He was too weak to stand up to him. The investors left without finishing their meal. They scurried out the door, leaving the Stone family alone in their wreckage. That night, my phone rang at midnight. I looked at the caller ID. It was Kimberly. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sit in the fear for a moment. I wanted her to really feel the absence of my protection. Then I answered. "Hello, Kimberly," I said. My voice was calm, steady, indifferent. "Lionel," she whispered. She was crying. I could hear the muffled sound of a locked door. She was hiding in her own bathroom. "What do you want, Kimberly?" I asked. "You have to come over," she sobbed. "You have to get him out. He is crazy, Lionel. He threw a bottle at the wall. He is screaming at Terrence. I am scared. The kids are scared. Call the police," I said. "I cannot," she hissed. "Think of the scandal. The press is already watching us. If the police come and arrest Terrence's dad, it will ruin us. Please, Lionel, you know how to handle him. You are big. He is afraid of you. Just come over and scare him away. Tell him the house is yours. Throw him out." I listened to her pleading. A month ago, I would have been in my truck before she finished the sentence. I would have driven through snow and fire to keep them safe. But that man no longer existed. That man had died on the dining room floor. "Kimberly," I said slowly, "you and Terrence wanted to be the heads of the family. You wanted to sit in the chair. Well, dealing with difficult family members is part of the job. But he is dangerous," she cried. "He is ruining the furniture. He is drinking everything. He is Terrence's father," I said. "He is the blood of a king, remember? That is what Terrence posted. You two wanted to rewrite history. You wanted to erase me and replace me with him. Now you have him. Lionel, please," she begged. "I am sorry. We are sorry. Just help us this one time." I walked to my window and looked out at the city lights. I thought of Esther. I thought of how hard I fought to keep Joe away from them. I realized that some lessons cannot be taught in a classroom or a boardroom. Some lessons have to be lived. "No," I said. "What do you mean, no?" she shrieked. "You are leaving us with a monster. I am leaving you with the family you chose," I said. "You wanted a real man, Kimberly. You did not want the boring old truck driver. You wanted excitement. You wanted the legacy. Well, Joe is the legacy. Enjoy him." "But what if he hurts us?" she whispered. "Then you will learn to call the police instead of calling the man you threw away," I said. "Lionel, wait," she cried. "Good night, Kimberly," I said. I hung up the phone. I did not feel guilty. I felt a strange sense of balance. For years I had been the dam holding back the floodwaters of their own bad judgment. Now the dam was gone. The water was rushing in. They would have to learn how to swim or they would drown. I turned off the ringer on my phone. I went to bed. I slept soundly, knowing that for the first time in 30 years, the chaos in the Stone mansion was not my problem to fix. It was theirs. The city of Chicago has a way of smelling like money and desperation at the exact same time. It was a Friday night, and the wind was cutting through the streets like a razor blade. I sat in my truck, parked across the street from a high-end steakhouse in the Loop. I was not there to eat. I was there to watch the final act of a tragedy that I had seen coming for weeks. Inside that restaurant, Terrence was holding court. I could see him through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. He was wearing a suit that I had paid for 3 years ago. He was laughing too loud. He was pouring champagne for a table full of people who did not care about him. They only cared about the last name he carried. What those people did not know, and what Terrence refused to accept, was that the champagne was bought with blood money. When I cut off the credit cards and fired him from the company, Terrence did not get a job. He did not sell his watch. He did not humble himself. Instead, he did what addicts always do. He found a shortcut. He went to a loan shark in the South Side, a man known only as Silas. Silas did not run credit checks. Silas did not care about FICO scores. Silas cared about collateral. And Terrence, in his arrogance, had used the only collateral he thought he had. Me. He told Silas that the dispute with his father was temporary. He told him that I was just an old man throwing a tantrum and that access to the stone fortune would be restored any day now. He borrowed $50,000 at 20% interest a week to maintain the illusion that he was still the prince of the city. He used that money to fund the dinners and the hotel rooms and the gambling habits of his biological father, Joe. But tonight, the week was up, and Silas was not a man who accepted excuses. I watched two black SUVs pull up to the curb in front of the restaurant. They blocked in the silver Porsche that Terrence was still driving illegally. 4 men stepped out. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing heavy coats, and they moved with the heavy, purposeful gait of men who hurt people for a living. They did not go inside. They waited. They leaned against the Porsche and lit cigarettes. They looked like vultures waiting for a wounded animal to stumble out of its cave. I reached into the glove compartment of my truck and pulled out a newspaper. It was today's edition of the Chicago Tribune. I unfolded it slowly, the paper crinkling in the silence of the cab. I turned to page 12, the legal notices section. It was a wall of small black text, mostly foreclosures and name changes. But right in the center, surrounded by a thick black border, was the notice I had placed 3 days ago. It read simply, "Public notice regarding Lionel Stone and Stone Logistics. Be it known that Lionel Stone accepts no financial responsibility for any debts incurred by Terrence Stone or Kimberly Stone. Any representation of agency or access to Stone Logistics assets by these individuals is false and fraudulent." It was a cold legal shield. It was the only way to protect the company and the pensions of my employees from the sharks that Terrence was swimming with. I knew that Silas read the papers. I knew that every bookie in Chicago read the legal notices to see who was going broke. I looked back at the restaurant. The door opened. Terrence stepped out. He was beaming, his face flushed with alcohol. He was saying goodbye to his guests, acting the part of the magnanimous host. Then he turned and saw the men leaning on his car. His smile vanished. I saw his body stiffen. I saw him look left and right, looking for an escape route. There was none. One of the men stepped forward. I knew him by reputation. He was Silas's chief enforcer, a man named Bricks. He said something to Terrence. I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language. He held out a hand, palm up. He wanted the money. Terrence started talking fast. He waved his hands. He pointed back at the restaurant. He pointed at his watch. Then he made the mistake that sealed his fate. He pointed at my office building in the distance. He was telling them the lie again. He was telling them that his father would pay. Bricks reached into his pocket. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded piece of newspaper. He held it up to Terrence's face. It was my notice. I saw Terrence recoil as if he had been slapped. He stared at the paper. He looked up at Bricks and shook his head. He was pleading now. He was begging. He grabbed Bricks's arm, trying to explain that the paper was wrong, that it was just a misunderstanding. Bricks pulled his arm away. He signaled to the other men. They did not shoot him. That would attract too much attention. They moved with terrifying efficiency. 2 of them grabbed Terrence by the shoulders. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the wind and the traffic. They dragged him toward the alley next to the restaurant, away from the main streetlights. I should have looked away. A father should not watch his son be disciplined by the streets. But I could not close my eyes. I had protected him from consequences for 35 years. By protecting him, I had crippled him. Now I had to let him feel the fall, so that he might finally learn how to stand up. They threw him against the brick wall. Terrence slid down to the ground. He curled into a ball, covering his head with his hands. He was crying. I could see his shoulders shaking. Bricks leaned over him. He said something else. Then he reached down and grabbed Terrence's left arm. Terrence struggled, kicking his legs against the wet pavement. But Bricks was too strong. He placed Terrence's arm across his own knee like a piece of dry wood. Then he pulled. The snap was not audible from where I sat, but I felt it in my own bones. Terrence threw his head back and opened his mouth in a silent scream of pure agony. His body went limp. The men stepped back. They were not done. One of them walked over to the silver Porsche. He used a tool to pop the lock in seconds. He got in and started the engine. The other men piled into the SUVs. They left Terrence lying in the slush in the alleyway holding his broken arm. They took the car. They took his dignity. They took the lie he had been living. I sat there for a long minute. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to start the truck. I wanted to drive over there and pick him up. I wanted to take him to the hospital and pay the bill and tell him it would be all right. But I forced my hand to stay on the gear shift. If I went to him now, I would be the savior again. If I went to him now, he would blame the bookies and he would blame the bad luck, but he would not blame himself. He needed to sit in that alley. He needed to feel the cold. He needed to realize that the name Stone was not a magic spell that could ward off reality. I watched as a couple walking their dog stopped at the mouth of the alley. The woman screamed. The man pulled out his phone to call 911. He was safe. The ambulance would come. The police would come. He would live. I put the truck in drive. I did not turn on my headlights until I was a block away. I drove home to my empty house. I walked into my study and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat in my leather chair, the chair that no one else was allowed to sit in. I drank the whiskey in one gulp. It burned going down. I pulled out my ledger. Under the column marked liabilities, I wrote a single line, Terrence Stone, debt paid in full. I closed the book. Tomorrow the hospital would call. Tomorrow the press would have a field day with the story of the Stone heir beaten in an alley over gambling debts. Tomorrow the shame would rain down on my name like ash. But tonight, the lesson was delivered. I went upstairs to my bedroom. I took the newspaper out of my coat pocket and threw it in the trash. It had done its job. I lay down in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside. I prayed for Terrence. I prayed that the pain in his arm would finally wake up the man inside the boy. But deep down, I knew that some people do not wake up until they have lost everything. And Terrence still had one thing left to lose. He still had Kimberly. And when she found out the money was gone and the Porsche was gone, she would be the one to deliver the final blow that not even a loan shark could match. I closed my eyes and waited for the morning. The war was turning, and the casualties were mounting. The rain that night was relentless, drumming against the slate roof of my empty house like 1,000 angry fingers. It was 2 a.m. I was wide awake, sitting in my study with a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. I was reading a book about the history of the railroads, but I was not absorbing a single word. My mind was on Terrence lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm. I had paid his medical bill anonymously, but I had not visited. I knew that if I went to him now, he would think the bank was open again. I had to stay strong. I had to let the silence do the teaching. Then came the knock at the front door. It was not the heavy pounding of the police or the frantic banging of a drunk. It was a soft, hesitant knock. It was the sound of someone who wanted to be let in but did not want to wake the neighbors. I checked the security monitor on my desk. Standing on my front porch, drenched in rain, was Kimberly. I watched her for a moment. She was not wearing her usual armor of designer coats and high heels. She was wearing a simple trench coat belted tightly at the waist, and her hair was plastered to her cheeks. She looked small. She looked fragile. She looked exactly the way she wanted me to see her. I walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. The wind blew rain into the foyer. Kimberly stood there shivering. When she saw me, she did not say a word. She just collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands. Lionel, she wept. Please help me. I have nowhere else to go. I stepped back. I did not hug her. I did not offer her a towel. I simply gestured for her to come inside out of the storm. She walked into the living room, leaving wet footprints on the floor. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, acting as if she were terrified to take up space. This was a woman who used to walk through this house like she owned the deed. Now she was playing the role of the refugee. I poured her a glass of water and set it on the coaster. I sat in my armchair opposite her. Talk, I said. She took a sip of water, her hands trembling. He is out of control, Lionel, she whispered. Terrence has lost his mind. Ever since the bookies beat him up, he has been taking pills for the pain, but he takes too many. He screams at me. He screams at the kids. He blames me for everything. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks in perfect tragic lines. He hit me, Lionel, she said. He pushed me against the wall just like he pushed you. I was so scared. I grabbed the kids and took them to my mother's house, but I could not stay there. It is too crowded, and I needed to see you. I needed to apologize. I looked at her face. There were no bruises, there was no swelling, but I stayed silent, letting her spin the web. I know we made mistakes, she continued, her voice getting stronger. I know we were greedy, but it was him, Lionel. It was always Terrence. He pressured me. He told me that you wanted us to take over. He told me that pushing for the inheritance was what Esther would have wanted. I was just trying to be a good wife. I was just following his lead. She unbelted her coat. Underneath, she was wearing a silk dress that was cut low. It was not the dress of a woman fleeing domestic violence. It was the dress of a woman coming to make a deal. She crossed her legs, leaning toward me. I miss you, she said softly. I miss our family. The kids miss their grandpa. I made a mistake keeping them from you. I see that now. But I can fix it. I can make Terrence go to rehab. I can take over his role at the company. You and I can run things, Lionel. We are the smart ones. We are the survivors. I watched her performance with a detachment that surprised me. A month ago, I might have believed her. A month ago, I might have thought she was just a misguided young woman caught in my son's orbit. But tonight, I saw the truth. She was not a victim. She was a chameleon. She saw that Terrence was a sinking ship, and she was trying to jump onto the only life raft left, me. She stood up and walked over to my chair. She knelt on the floor beside me, placing her hand on my knee. Let me come back, she whispered. Let me take care of you. You are all alone in this big house. You need a woman's touch here. You need family. Dump Terrence. He is weak. He is just like his father. But I am strong, Lionel. I can be the daughter you never had. The smell of her perfume filled my nose. It was expensive and cloying. It smelled like betrayal. I stood up abruptly, forcing her to pull her hand away. I walked to my desk and picked up my tablet. You say Terrence is the villain? I said, my voice flat. You say he forced you to treat me like garbage. Yes, she said, standing up and wiping her eyes. He poisoned my mind against you. I always respected you, Lionel. I always loved you. I tapped the screen of the tablet. I swiped through the files until I found the folder marked Security Archives, December 25th. I have something to show you, I said. I turned the screen toward her. It was the video footage from the dining room on Christmas night. The angle was high from the camera hidden in the motion sensor in the corner. The audio was crystal clear. We watched the scene play out. We watched Terrence shove me. We watched me fall, but I did not pause the video there. I let it play. I let it play to the moment after I walked out the door. On the screen, Terrence was pacing back and forth looking guilty, but Kimberly was sitting at the table calmly checking her reflection in a spoon. Then her voice came through the speakers, sharp and hateful. Thank God the old goat is gone, she said on the video. I thought he would never leave. He smells like cheap soap and desperation. In the video, Terrence looked at her and said, Maybe we went too hard on him, Kim. He looked hurt. And then Kimberly, the woman currently standing in my living room begging for mercy, delivered the line that killed any pity I might have had. Who cares if he is hurt, she said on the screen. He is just the wallet, Terrence. Once we get power of attorney, we can stick him in a home and forget he exists. I am tired of pretending to like his cooking. I am tired of pretending he is one of us. He is just the help. I stopped the video. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at Kimberly. Her face had gone pale. The act was over. The tears had stopped, instantly replaced by a look of pure terror. I did not mean that she stammered, backing away. I was angry. I was drunk. You were sober, I said, and you were honest. That was the only time you were ever honest, Kimberly. Lionel, please, she said, holding out her hands. That was out of context. It was the entire context, I said, my voice rising for the first time. You called me the help. You planned to lock me away. You called me a wallet. I walked toward her. She retreated until her back hit the front door. I looked at her with disgust. I thought Terrence was the problem, I said. I thought he was the bad seed. And he is a fool. He is a weak, entitled fool who gambled away his life. But he is a fool who is suffering. He is lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm because he tried to impress you. I leaned in close to her face. But you, I whispered. You are not a fool, Kimberly. You are a snake. You watched him drown and you cheered. You pushed me down and you laughed. And now that the money is gone, you want to slither over to the winning side. No, she said, shaking her head. No, Lionel, I love you. You do not know what love is, I said. You only know hunger. You are hungry for money, you are hungry for status. But the kitchen is closed. I reached past her and unlocked the door. I threw it open. The wind howled outside, blowing rain onto her expensive silk dress. Get out, I said. Lionel, you cannot throw me out in this storm, she screamed, dropping the facade completely, her face twisted into a snarl. I will sue you. I will tell everyone you hit me. Go ahead, I said, pointing to the camera in the corner of the foyer. Tell them. I have audio and video of this entire conversation. I have you on tape offering to abandon your husband to secure your financial future. She looked at the camera. She looked at me. She knew she was beaten. You are a bitter old man, she spat. You are going to die alone in this house, and no one will care. I may die alone, I said, but I will die with my name clean, and I will die knowing I did not let a viper sleep in my bed. She stepped out onto the porch. The rain soaked her, instantly ruining her hair and her coat. She looked back at me one last time, her eyes filled with hate. I hope you rot, she screamed. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I engaged the security chain. I walked back into the living room. I picked up the glass of water she had touched and poured it into the plant in the corner. Then I took the glass to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can. I did not want to wash it. I did not want anything she had touched to remain in my home. I went back to my study. I sat down and picked up my book about the railroads. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I had lost a son to greed. I had lost a daughter-in-law to malice. But I had kept my soul. I read the same page 3 times before I finally understood the words. The storm raged outside, but inside the house it was quiet. It was the quiet of a fortress that had repelled an invasion. I was alone. But for the first time in 30 years I was safe, and that was enough. The sun was barely up when the assassination began. It was not a physical attack. It was something much more modern and much more efficient. I sat in my kitchen drinking black coffee, watching the morning news on the small television on the counter. There she was, Kimberly. She was sitting on the beige sofa of a popular local talk show. She was not wearing the silk dress from the night before. She was wearing a modest gray sweater and little makeup. She looked tired. She looked beaten. She looked like the perfect victim. The host, a woman who thrived on outrage, leaned in with a sympathetic expression. She asked Kimberly to tell her story, and Kimberly told a story that was a masterpiece of fiction. She described a lonely, terrified mother trying to protect her children from a grandfather who had lost his mind. She described me as a tyrant who controlled every penny, who forced them to beg for food, and who had physically thrown her out into a storm because she dared to ask for help with medical bills. I watched as a tear slid down her cheek right on cue. The host gasped. The audience murmured in anger. Then they showed the photos. They were photos of my house taken from the street, looking like a fortress. They showed a blurry picture of Terrence in a hospital bed, his arm in a cast. They did not mention the bookies. They did not mention the gambling debt. They simply said that he had been injured and his father had refused to help. The court of public opinion did not wait for evidence. By noon, the internet was on fire. I scrolled through the comments on the news station's social media page. They called me a monster. They called me abusive. They said I hated my daughter-in-law because she was white. They said I was jealous of my son. The hashtag boycott Stone Logistics began to trend. I received a call from my vice president at 1 o'clock. He sounded panicked. He told me that 3 major clients had called to put our contracts on hold. They did not want to be associated with a brand that abused women and children. The stock price of our holding company took a dip. It was small at first, but it was bleeding. I turned off the television. I did not throw the remote. I did not scream. I felt a cold calm settle over me. This was their final play. They could not beat me in the boardroom. They could not beat me in the courts. So they were trying to burn the house down with me inside it. They thought that because I was old and private, I would be afraid of the spotlight. They thought I would write a check just to make the noise stop. They were wrong. I drove to the office. There were reporters camped out at the gate. They shoved microphones at my truck window, screaming questions. Do you hate your family, Mr. Stone? Why did you break your son's arm? I did not answer. I drove through the gate and parked in my spot. I walked into the conference room where Althea was waiting. She had boxes of files stacked on the table. She looked at me, and she did not look worried. She looked like a predator who had just spotted a limping gazelle. "Is everything ready?" I asked. Althea smiled. She tapped a hard drive sitting on the table. "We have everything," she said. "We have the credit card statements showing the liquor and the jewelry. We have the police report from the night Terrence was beaten, which clearly states it was a gambling dispute. But we have something better." She opened her laptop and clicked on a video file. "I sent a private investigator to the club Terrence frequented," she said. "It turns out the VIP room has security cameras with audio. This was recorded 3 weeks ago, just 2 days before Christmas. I watched the screen. Terrence and Kimberly were sitting in a booth. They were drinking expensive champagne. Terrence was laughing. I turned up the volume. "I cannot wait until the old man kicks the bucket," Terrence said on the video. His speech was slurred. "I mean, I love him in a way, but he is so cheap. He is sitting on a mountain of gold and he acts like we are still poor." Kimberly laughed. She clinked her glass against his. "Just be patient, baby," she said. "His heart is not good. All that stress at the company. One day he will just drop over and then it is all ours. The house, the trucks, the accounts. We will sell the business and move to Miami. We just have to keep pretending to be nice for a little while longer." I watched my son raise a glass to my death. I watched the woman I had welcomed into my home cheer for my heart to stop beating. It hurt. I will not lie. It felt like a physical blow to the chest. But the pain was quickly replaced by resolve. "This is it," I said. "This is the nail in the coffin." Althea nodded. "Do you want to release it to the press?" "No," I said. "I want to hold a press conference. I want to look them in the eye when I do it." We scheduled the conference for 4 o'clock that afternoon. We set up a podium in the main warehouse. I wanted the backdrop to be the trucks. I wanted the backdrop to be the work. The reporters filed in. There were dozens of them. They were hungry for a scandal. They expected an apology. They expected a frail old man trying to explain away his cruelty. I walked out to the podium. I was wearing my work boots and a clean-pressed shirt. I did not wear a suit. I wanted them to see Lionel Stone the worker, not the tycoon. The room went quiet. The cameras flashed blindingly. I adjusted the microphone. "My name is Lionel Stone," I said. My voice echoed through the warehouse. "I founded this company 40 years ago with 2 hands and a strong back. I have never stolen a dime. I have never hit a woman. And I have never abandoned a child." A reporter from the back shouted out. "But your daughter-in-law says you left them destitute. She says you are punishing them." I looked at the reporter. "I am not punishing them," I said. "I am stopping them from punishing me." I signaled to Althea. She pressed a button on the laptop connected to a large projection screen behind me. The video from the club began to play. The sound of Terrence's voice filled the room, the sound of his laughter, the sound of his wish for my death. The reporters stopped taking notes. They stared at the screen. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air was sucked out of the warehouse. The video ended. The screen went black. I looked out at the sea of faces. "You ask why I cut them off," I said. "You ask why I closed my wallet. You just heard the answer." They were not waiting for an inheritance. They were waiting for a funeral. I paused, letting the words sink in. "I love my son," I continued. "I paid his medical bills yesterday, even though he does not know it. I have paid for his house, his car, and his food for his entire adult life. But I will not pay for people to bet on the date of my death." I picked up a stack of papers from the podium. "These are the receipts," I said. "These are the gambling debts. These are the luxury vacations taken while they claimed to be broke. I am releasing all of them to the public record today." I looked directly into the camera lens. I knew Kimberly was watching. I knew she was sitting somewhere thinking she had won. To the public, I said, "Do not judge a man until you know the weight of the load he is carrying. And to my family, the free ride is over. If you want money, you can earn it. We are hiring drivers." I walked away from the podium. The room erupted. The reporters were shouting questions, but the tone was different now. They were not attacking. They were shocked. They were scrambling to get the story out to correct the narrative. I walked back to my office. Althea was waiting. She was smiling. "The stock is already bouncing back," she said. "And the comments on the live stream have turned. They are apologizing, Lionel. They are calling you a hero." I sat down in my chair. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like a father who had just exposed his children's shame to the world. It was necessary, but it was tragic. I looked at the picture of Esther on my desk. "I am sorry," I whispered to her, "but they left me no choice." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Kimberly. "You monster." I deleted it. The smear campaign was over. The truth was out. They had tried to bury me with lies, but they forgot one thing. I am the one who moves the earth. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a smell I had known well in my early days when I had to fight for permits and zoning rights. But today the air felt different. It felt heavy with the specific kind of sadness that comes when a family destroys itself in public. I sat at the defense table next to Althea. She was calm, shuffling her papers with the precision of a card dealer. On the other side of the aisle sat Terrence. He looked terrible. His arm was in a sling and his face was gaunt. He had shaved his head trying to look tough, but he just looked exposed. Kimberly was not there. She had read the wind and knew which way the tree was falling. She was likely at home packing her bags. The judge was an older man named Judge Reynolds. He had deep lines around his mouth and eyes that had seen too many lies. He looked at Terrence's lawyer, a young man in a shiny suit who was trying too hard to sound important. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, "my client Terrence Stone has dedicated the prime years of his life to the Stone family legacy. He was raised with the expectation of inheritance. He contributed emotionally to the stability of the household, which allowed Mr. Lionel Stone to focus on his business. We are asking for $5 million in retroactive adoptive support and lifestyle maintenance. We argue that Mr. Stone created a verbal contract of care that he has now breached maliciously." I listened to the words. Lifestyle maintenance, emotional contribution. They were fancy words for greed. Terrence sat there nodding, believing his own lie. He really believed that existing in my house was a job that required a salary. Judge Reynolds looked over his glasses at me. "Mr. Stone, do you have anything to say before I render a judgment on this motion?" Althea touched my arm. She signaled that I could let her handle it, but I shook my head. This was not a legal argument. This was a moral one. I stood up. My knees popped in the quiet room. I walked to the witness stand and took the oath. I sat down and looked at Terrence. He would not meet my eyes. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was low and gravelly. "I have heard a lot about expectations today. I have heard a lot about what my son thinks he is owed. He talks about the Stone legacy like it is a pot of gold that I found at the end of a rainbow. He talks about the chairman's seat like it is a throne." I paused, taking a deep breath. The memory of the chair at the head of the dining table filled my mind. "That chair is made of white oak," I continued. "I built it myself in 1982. I built it at night after working 14-hour shifts driving a flatbed truck from Detroit to Chicago. I sanded that wood until my fingers bled because I wanted something beautiful for my wife. I wanted a place where the head of the family could sit and rest." I looked at the judge. "My son thinks that sitting in that chair makes you a king. He thinks it gives you the right to order people around and drink expensive scotch. But he does not know what that chair actually is. That chair is a waiting room." I leaned forward, gripping the railing of the stand. For 30 years I sat in that chair and worried. I worried about payroll. I worried about the price of diesel. I worried about the drivers who were out on the road in ice storms while their families slept. I sat in that chair and read safety reports about jackknife trailers. I sat in that chair and balanced ledgers that were bleeding red ink during the recession. I turned to Terrence. "You talk about contributing to the family, Terrence. Let me tell you about contribution. Contribution is missing your 10th birthday because I was stuck in a blizzard in Ohio trying to deliver a load of steel so we could pay the mortgage. Contribution is eating cold sandwiches at a truck stop on Thanksgiving because if I stopped driving, the company would go under. Contribution is coming home with grease under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove and hugging you even though my back felt like it was on fire." Terrence shifted in his seat. He looked down at the table. "You want the seat, Terrence," I said. "You want the title. But you do not want the weight. You see the polished wood, but you do not see the splinters. You see the bank account, but you do not see the sleepless nights. You pushed me down because you thought I was weak. You thought that because I limp and because I have gray hair that I was done. But the limp comes from jumping off loading docks. The gray hair comes from holding this family together when your mother could not stop spending money." I felt tears pricking my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I was not crying for myself. I was crying for the wasted potential of the man sitting across from me. "You say I owe you a lifestyle," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I gave you a lifestyle. I gave you a debt-free education. I gave you a car that was safer than anything I ever drove. I gave you a job where you could leave at 5 o'clock. I gave you the freedom to never know what it feels like to be hungry. And what did you do with it? You gambled it, you mocked it. You treated the men and women who work for me like they were beneath you. I pointed a finger at him. My hand was shaking not from age, but from the sheer force of my conviction. A father owes his son a foundation. I gave you concrete. You chose to build a house of cards on top of it. And now that it has collapsed, you want me to pay for the wreckage. I will not do it. I will not pay you to be useless. I will not pay you to disrespect the labor that put the clothes on your back. That chair is not for sale, Terrence. And it is certainly not for you. Not because I hate you, but because you are not strong enough to carry it. If you sit in it now, it will break you. I sat back. The room was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. The air was thick with the truth. It was a hard truth, the kind that tastes like iron and dirt. Terrence looked up. His face was wet with tears. For the first time, he looked at me and I saw a flicker of shame. He finally understood. It was never about the money. It was about the sweat. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Terrence with a mixture of pity and sternness. "Mr. Stone the younger," he said, "in this court we deal with laws, but we also deal with equity. Equity means fairness. I have reviewed the financial records submitted by the defense. I have seen the history of support provided by your father." The judge picked up his gavel. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight. "There is no statute in the state of Illinois that requires a parent to support an able-bodied adult child indefinitely," the judge said. "There is no law that entitles you to a lifestyle you did not earn. Your claim of an implied contract is dismissed. Your claim of emotional contribution is dismissed." Terrence slumped in his chair. His lawyer closed his briefcase, sensing the end. Furthermore, Judge Reynolds continued, his voice hard as steel. "The court finds this lawsuit to be frivolous and predatory. It is an abuse of the legal system designed to harass a man who has done nothing but provide for you." The judge looked at me. "Mr. Lionel Stone, you are released from all claims. And Mr. Terrence Stone, you are hereby ordered to pay the full legal fees of the defendant. The court also orders you to pay the court costs for wasting the taxpayer's time." The gavel came down. It made a sharp final sound. It sounded like a door slamming shut. Bang! "All rise," the bailiff shouted. I stood up. I felt light. The burden I had carried since Christmas night was gone. I looked at Terrence. He was still sitting there staring at the wood grain of the table. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to wait for me at the window. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to put my hand on his shoulder, but I knew I could not. He had to walk out of this room on his own 2 feet. He had to feel the weight of his own life. I turned to Althea. "Let us go," I said. We walked down the aisle. I did not look back. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway. The sun was streaming through the windows. It was bright and blinding. I took a deep breath. The air smelled clean. It smelled like the future. I walked to the elevator, my steps echoing on the marble floor. I was an old man with a bad hip and a broken heart, but I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to go back to work, not to pay for someone else's mistakes, but to build something new. The chair was waiting, and I was ready to sit in it. You would think that a man who had been beaten by loan sharks and publicly disowned by his father would go into hiding. You would think he would find a quiet corner of the world to lick his wounds and think about his mistakes. But Terrence was not a man capable of reflection. He was a creature of ego, and when you strip a narcissist of his feathers, he does not learn to fly, he simply finds a new way to fake it. I thought I had taken everything from him. I took the car, I took the house, I took the job. But I had forgotten the one thing he still possessed. The one thing that opened doors that should have remained locked. My name. 3 weeks after the trial, I received a phone call from a woman named Mrs. Higgins. She was the widow of one of my first drivers, a good man who died of a heart attack 10 years ago. I had kept her on the company pension plan because it was the right thing to do. Her voice on the phone was shaking. "Mr. Stone," she said, "I do not mean to bother you, but I was wondering when the first dividend check from the new expansion fund would arrive. Terrence said it would be here by the 1st of the month." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. "What expansion fund, Mrs. Higgins?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "The Stone Family Future Fund," she replied. "Terrence came to my house last week. He looked so thin, poor boy, with his arm in a sling. He told me that you were launching a new private investment tier for friends and family. He said it was guaranteed by the company. I gave him $10,000, Lionel. That was my savings for my hip surgery." I closed my eyes. The rage that filled me was different from the anger I felt at Christmas. That was personal. This was professional. This was predatory. Terrence was using my name, the name I built on 40 years of honest sweat, to rob the very people I had sworn to protect. He was out there wearing cheap suits and flashing an old business card, selling a lie. I told Mrs. Higgins I would handle it. I told her I would send her a personal check for the $10,000 that afternoon. I hung up the phone and I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I simply realized that I had to kill the ghost. I went to Althea's office. I did not make an appointment. I walked past her secretary and into her private room. She was on the phone, but she hung up when she saw my face. "He is using the name I said. He is scamming widows using the name Stone." Althea nodded. She had heard rumors. "We can sue him for fraud," she said. "We can send him to jail." "Jail is too good for him," I said. "In jail, he will just be a victim. He will tell everyone his rich father framed him. I want to take away his weapon. I want to take away the name." Althea sighed. "Lionel, you know that is difficult. He is your adopted son. The law says the name is his property now. We cannot just repossess a name like a leased truck. There has to be a way," I said. "You are the best lawyer in Chicago. Find a way. Dig into the past. Dig into the paperwork. I know Joe, his biological father, was a mess. I know the adoption was messy. Find a crack in the foundation, Althea, and bring me a sledgehammer." Althea looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone. "Get the archives," she said to her assistant. "Bring me the physical files from 1995. For 3 days, Althea disappeared into the basement of the courthouse. I waited. I ran my company. I reimbursed 3 more elderly victims who had fallen for Terrence's scheme. Each check I wrote fueled my resolve. On the 4th day, Althea called me. Her voice was trembling with excitement. "Come to my office," she said. "I found it." When I arrived, there was a single yellow document sitting on her desk. It smelled of mildew and old secrets. "Look at the signature line," Althea said, pointing with a manicured nail. I looked. It was the consent form for the termination of parental rights, the document Joe Ratz needed to sign to allow me to adopt Terrence. The signature read, "Joe Ratz." But there was no notary stamp, and the date next to it was written in a different ink. Althea leaned back in her chair, a shark-like grin on her face. "Joe never legally surrendered his rights," she explained. "The notary log from that day shows no entry for Joe Ratz. The lawyer your late wife hired was a cheap strip mall attorney who cut corners. He forged the notary seal, but he forgot to file the affidavit of service." "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It means the adoption was technically defective," Althea said. "It means that in the eyes of the strict letter of the law, the process was never completed. We never noticed because no one challenged it. But now we are challenging it. We can petition the court to vacate the adoption decree based on procedural fraud and lack of jurisdiction." And the name I asked. "If the adoption is vacated," Althea said, "his legal name reverts to what it was on his birth certificate." I sat back in the chair. It was the nuclear option. It meant erasing 30 years of fatherhood. It meant admitting that on paper he was never my son. But I thought of Mrs. Higgins. I thought of the $10,000 stolen from a widow. "Do it," I said. The hearing was scheduled for an emergency session. We framed it as a matter of public safety. We argued that Terrence was using a fraudulently obtained identity to commit financial crimes. The judge was a stern woman named Judge Patterson. She had no patience for scammers. Terrence stood in this courtroom alone. He looked small. He looked confused. He thought this was another lawsuit about money. He did not know we were coming for his soul. Althea laid out the case. She showed the forged notary seal. She showed the police reports of the scams. She showed the affidavits from the victims. Then she played her ace. "Your Honor," Althea said, "the name Stone is a trademark of integrity. This man has no biological right to it, and due to the defective legal process, he has no statutory right to it. He is using it as a costume to prey on the vulnerable. We ask the court to correct the clerical error of 1995 and restore his true identity." The judge looked at Terrence. "Mr. Stone, or rather Mr. Ratz, do you have anything to say?" Terrence stammered. But I have been Terrence Stone my whole life. My driver license says Stone. My passport says Stone. Because you have been living a lie, the judge said, cutting him off. A lie that your stepfather graciously allowed you to live until you weaponized it against his community. The judge picked up her pen. She signed the order with a flourish. The petition to vacate the adoption is granted, the judge declared. The Department of Vital Records is ordered to amend the birth certificate of the respondent immediately. Furthermore, the respondent is hereby permanently enjoined from using the name Stone in any commercial, financial, or legal capacity under penalty of contempt of court. She looked down at him. You leave this courtroom today as Terrence Ratz. I suggest you start living a life that does not shame that name too. The gavel banged. I stood up. I looked at him. He was staring at the floor. He was shaking. He had lost the house. He had lost the money. But he always had the swagger of a Stone. He always had the armor of my reputation. Now he was naked. He was just a Ratz. I walked past him. Goodbye, Mr. Ratz, I said. He did not answer. He could not. He no longer knew who he was. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. I pulled out my phone and called Mrs. Higgins. It is over, I told her. He will never hurt anyone with my name again. I hung up. I felt a lightness in my chest that I had not felt in years. I had cut the final cord. The parasite had been removed. I walked to my truck. I saw a young man walking down the street wearing a Stone Logistics hat. He nodded at me with respect. Nice truck, Mr. Stone, he said. Thank you, son, I said. I climbed in and started the engine. The name on the side of the door seemed to shine a little brighter. It was my name. It was clean, and I was going to keep it that way. Kimberly was a survivor. I will give her that much. A cockroach is also a survivor, but you do not invite it to dinner. 3 months after Terrence was publicly stripped of my name and my money, Kimberly had filed for divorce. She did not even wait for the ink to dry on his new birth certificate. She packed her bags, left him in his rented apartment with his broken arm and his shattered ego, and went hunting. I heard about her new target from the gossip columns in the business section. His name was Arthur Sterling. He was a real estate developer from New York who had just moved to Chicago to oversee a massive skyscraper project. Arthur was 55 years old, wealthy, and notoriously fond of younger women who knew how to listen to his stories. Kimberly fit the profile perfectly. She had reinvented herself again. She was no longer the abused wife of a gambling addict. Now she was the tragic widow of a lost fortune, a sophisticated woman who had been swindled by a cruel father-in-law. I saw photos of them at galas. Kimberly was wearing diamonds again. She was smiling that practiced smile, the one that did not reach her eyes. She was whispering in Arthur's ear, probably telling him how misunderstood she was, probably telling him that she just needed a strong man to protect her. She was climbing the ladder again, rung by rung, using her charm as a grappling hook. I did not intervene at first. I was busy rebuilding my relationship with the twins who were now living with Kimberly's mother while she played the socialite. I paid their tuition directly to the school as promised, and I saw them every Tuesday. They seemed happier away from the toxicity of their parents. But then Arthur Sterling called me. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing shipping manifests. My assistant buzzed me. Mr. Sterling is on line 1, she said. He says it is regarding a logistics contract for his new building. I picked up the phone. I knew Arthur vaguely. We had done business in the 80s. He was a shark, but he was an honest shark. Lionel Arthur boomed his voice full of confidence. Long time no see. I am looking for a reliable fleet to haul steel for the new tower. I hear Stone Logistics is the only game in town worth playing. We talked business for 10 minutes. We haggled over rates per ton. We discussed delivery schedules. Arthur was sharp. He knew his numbers. We shook hands verbally on a multi-million-dollar deal. Then the conversation shifted. By the way, Lionel Arthur said, his voice softening, I believe I am dating your daughter-in-law, Kimberly. I paused. I swiveled my chair to look out the window. She is my former daughter-in-law, Arthur, I corrected him. She divorced my son last month. Right, Arthur said. Sad story that. She tells me you were quite hard on them, Lionel. Cut them off without a penny. Kicked them out in the snow. I have to say it does not sound like the Lionel Stone I know. But women have a way of seeing things differently, I suppose. I could hear the doubt in his voice. He was fishing. He wanted to know if he was sleeping with a victim or a viper. She is a charming woman, I said carefully. She has a talent for storytelling. She certainly does. Arthur laughed. She is very fond of you, actually. She says she forgives you. She says she just wants to move on. In fact, we are thinking of moving in together. I am closing on the penthouse at the new Ritz-Carlton next week. She is already picking out curtains. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. The Ritz-Carlton, the penthouse. She was about to secure another fortress. She was about to latch on to another host. And Arthur, for all his business acumen, was walking right into the trap. "Arthur," I said, "we have known each other a long time. We are both men who built our empires from the ground up." "Yes, we are," Arthur agreed. "I do not give advice on personal matters," I said. "But since we are about to be partners on this steel contract, I owe you full transparency." "I appreciate that, Lionel," Arthur said. "What is on your mind?" "I am not going to tell you who she is," I said. "I am not going to tell you what she did to my son or to me. You would think I was just a bitter old man." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy on the line. "But I will say this," I continued. "Before you sign that deed, before you let her pick out those curtains, just ask her one question." "What question is that?" Arthur asked. "Ask her about Christmas night," I said. "Ask her what she said when I fell on the floor. And if she tells you she cried, if she tells you she tried to help me, then you know everything you need to know." Arthur was silent for a long moment. "Christmas night," he repeated slowly. "Just ask her," I said. "And Arthur, check your credit card statements, just to be safe." I hung up. I did not need to say anything else. Arthur was not a fool. He was a man who looked for cracks in the foundation. I had just pointed out a fissure. 2 days later, the news broke. It was not in the business section this time. It was in the society pages. "Arthur Sterling dumps mystery girlfriend after public row at Le Colonial. According to the witnesses, they were having dinner. Arthur asked her a question. Kimberly started crying. Arthur checked his phone, probably looking at a bank alert. Then he stood up. He did not yell. He simply signaled the waiter to bring the check for his half of the meal. He left her sitting there with a bottle of Dom Perignon that she could not pay for. The fallout was swift and brutal. Arthur did not just break up with her. He evicted her. Apparently she had been staying in his corporate apartment while waiting for the penthouse. He had the locks changed within an hour. Her clothes, including the fur coats and the designer dresses, were left in bags with the doorman. Kimberly had burned her bridges with me. She had burned her bridges with Terrence. Now she had burned her bridges with the only other man in Chicago rich enough to support her delusions. I drove by her mother's house a week later. It was a small, run-down bungalow on the edge of the city in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks were cracked. It was the house Kimberly had spent her whole life trying to escape. I saw her car in the driveway. It was not the Range Rover. That had been repossessed months ago. It was a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the bumper. I saw Kimberly coming out of the house. She was wearing a red vest, a uniform. She was holding a name tag. She looked tired. The glamour was gone. The makeup was gone. She looked like a woman who had finally met reality. I slowed my truck down. Our eyes met for a split second. She did not glare at me. She did not scream. She just looked down at her shoes. It was a look of total defeat. I watched her get into the dented car and drive away to her shift at the supermarket. She would spend her day scanning groceries for other people. She would watch other families buy turkeys and wine. She would touch the things she used to take for granted, but she could not take them home. I did not feel happy. I did not feel gloating. I felt a sense of cosmic order. She had wanted to be a queen. She had wanted a throne. But she forgot that a throne must be earned. And now she was exactly where she belonged, serving others. I drove on. I had a meeting with Arthur Sterling to sign the steel contract, and then I had a date with my grandchildren. We were going to get ice cream, and I was going to pay for it with money that I earned, money that was clean, money that no one could ever take away from me. The gold digger had hit rock bottom, and I was finally driving on solid ground. Winter in Chicago is not just a season, it is a judge. It strips away the pretenses and the excuses and leaves you shivering in your truth. For 35 years, Terrence had experienced winter from behind the double-paned glass of a heated mansion or the climate-controlled cabin of a luxury car. He knew winter only as a scenic backdrop for his holiday parties. But now Terrence was learning what winter feels like when you are poor. He was living in a basement apartment in the Austin neighborhood. It was a single room with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked all night but produced no heat. There was no Persian rug on the floor, only cold concrete that sucked the warmth right out of his bones. There was no silver cutlery, only plastic forks he saved from takeout meals. And most importantly, there was no Lionel Stone to pay the rent. Terrence woke up at 4 in the morning. His alarm was the vibration of a cheap prepaid phone on the milk crate he used as a nightstand. He did not hit snooze. He could not afford to hit snooze. If he was late for his shift at the warehouse, he would be fired, and if he was fired, he would be on the street. He sat up groaning. His back was in spasms. His arm, the one the loan sharks had broken, had healed, but it ached with a dull, constant throb in the damp cold. He rubbed his eyes. They were red and rimmed with dark circles. He looked at his hands. They were no longer the soft, manicured hands of a man who held champagne flutes. They were raw. They were covered in blisters and calluses. The knuckles were swollen. They were the hands of a laborer. He got dressed in the dark. He put on a heavy work coat he had bought at a thrift store. It smelled of someone else's cigarettes, but it was warm. He pulled a beanie low over his ears. He walked out into the biting wind to catch the number 56 bus. He sat in the back, surrounded by other men who looked just like him, tired, broken, and trying to survive. He was working for Miller Distribution. It was a rival logistics company, one that I had competed against for years. They did not know who he was. To them, he was just T-Rats, a grunt worker on the loading dock. They did not care about his pedigree. They only cared about how many boxes he could move per hour. I knew where he was working because I make it my business to know everything that happens in my city. But I had never gone to see him. I had stayed away, letting the distance do its work. But fate has a way of arranging meetings when you least expect them. It was a Tuesday morning. I was driving my truck to the west side to inspect a shared facility where some of my overflow cargo was being stored. Miller Distribution shared the lot with us. I pulled my Ford F-150 into the yard. The heater was blasting warm air, and I was listening to the morning news. I felt comfortable. I felt secure. I parked the truck near the loading bays. I poured myself a cup of coffee from my thermos and looked out the window. That is when I saw him. It was a busy morning on the dock. Forklifts were buzzing around like angry hornets. Men were shouting. Steam was rising from their breath in the freezing air. In the middle of the chaos was a figure in a gray hoodie. He was struggling with a heavy crate. It was a crate of industrial machine parts, probably weighing 80 pounds. He was trying to lift it onto a pallet, but his bad arm was giving out. He grunted, his face twisted in pain. He dropped the crate. It hit the concrete with a loud crash. "Hey, idiot!" a voice boomed across the dock. I watched as the foreman, a man named Kowalski, stomped over. I knew Kowalski. He was a bully who enjoyed making small men feel smaller. "You are slowing down the line, rats," Kowalski screamed, spitting on the ground near Terrence's feet. "Pick it up." I watched my son. The old Terrence, the Terrence of 6 months ago, would have screamed back. He would have shouted, "Do you know who I am?" He would have threatened to sue. He would have thrown a tantrum. But this man did not scream. I saw Terrence flinch. He looked down at the crate. He wiped his nose with the back of his dirty glove. "I am sorry, boss," Terrence said. His voice was quiet. It barely carried over the noise of the engines. I slipped. "I do not pay you to slip," Kowalski yelled, leaning into his face. "I pay you to move boxes. If you cannot handle the weight, go home and cry to your mommy. We have 10 guys waiting for this job." I gripped my coffee cup. My knuckles turned white. It is a primal instinct for a father to protect his child. I wanted to open the truck door. I wanted to walk over there and tell Kowalski to back off. I wanted to tell him that the boy he was screaming at was the son of Lionel Stone, but I forced my hand to stay on the cup. If I saved him now, I would be robbing him. I would be stealing the most valuable thing he was earning, his dignity. You cannot buy dignity. You cannot inherit it. You have to forge it in the fire of humiliation. You have to build it with sweat. I watched Terrence. He took a deep breath. He did not look at Kowalski. He bent down. He grabbed the crate again. He gritted his teeth. I could see the veins popping in his neck. He engaged his legs. He ignored the pain in his arm. He lifted the crate. He placed it gently on the pallet. Then he turned and grabbed the next one. He was working. He was actually working. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was not pity. It was pride. For the first time in his life, he was not cutting corners. He was facing the mountain, and he was climbing it one rock at a time. I started the engine of my truck. The rumble drew attention. Terrence looked up. He saw the silver Ford. He knew that truck. He had ridden in the passenger seat 1,000 times when he was a boy. He froze. He stood there holding a box of auto parts, his breath clouding in the air. He looked through the windshield. Our eyes met. The distance between us was only 50 feet, but it felt like 50 miles. It was the distance between the penthouse and the pavement. I watched him closely. I waited for the reaction. I waited for him to drop the box and run over to me. I waited for him to bang on the window and beg for a loan. I waited for him to ask to come home. But he did not move. He looked at me. His face was thin, his beard was unkempt, but his eyes were clear. There was no arrogance in them anymore. There was only exhaustion and reality. He looked at his father, the man he had pushed down, the man he had disowned, the man he had tried to rob, and then he did something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. He lowered his head. It was not a bow of submission. It was a nod of acknowledgement. He was telling me that he understood. He was telling me that he knew why he was there. He was telling me that he was not going to ask for a rescue. He turned away from me. He turned back to the pallet. He lifted the box and stacked it. He went back to work. He chose the work over the handout. I sat there for a moment feeling the tears burn my eyes. I had been hard on him. I had destroyed his life. I had stripped him naked in front of the world. But in doing so, I had finally given him the chance to become a man. I put the truck in reverse. I nodded back at him even though his back was turned. "Keep going, son," I whispered to the empty cab. "Keep lifting." I rolled up the window, shutting out the cold and the noise. I backed out of the yard. I drove away, leaving him there in the cold, leaving him under the shouting of the foreman, leaving him to his pain. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It is easy to give a child everything they want. It is impossibly hard to let them struggle for what they need. I drove back to my office. I walked in and sat in the chairman's seat. The wood felt solid against my back. I pulled out a piece of paper. I picked up my pen. I wrote a note to my lawyer, Althea. "Keep an eye on him," I wrote. "Do not intervene. Do not give him money. But make sure he has medical insurance. Pay the premium anonymously." I folded the note. He was not ready to come home yet. He might never be ready. But today I saw a glimmer of iron in his spine, and iron is what holds the world together. I looked out the window at the gray sky. "You are doing it, Terrence," I thought. "You are finally doing it." And for the first time since Christmas, I did not feel like I had lost a son. I felt like I was watching one being born. It has been exactly 365 days since the gravy boat shattered on the floor. The calendar on the wall says December 25th. The snow outside is falling just as hard as it did last year, covering Chicago in a blanket of white silence. But inside the house, everything has changed. The air does not smell like expensive perfume and hidden resentment anymore. It smells like soul food. It smells like roasted ham and collard greens and cornbread. It smells like the kind of dinner I used to eat before I had money, when the only thing that filled the room was love. I stood at the head of the dining table, the same oak table, the same high-backed chair. But looking around the room, I did not see people waiting for me to die. I saw Frank, the security guard who had stood by me when the world turned its back. He was wearing a Santa hat and laughing with Maria, my housekeeper. I saw Althea, my lawyer, who had fought like a lioness to protect my name. She was holding a glass of wine and telling a story about her law school days. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the widow Terrence had tried to swindle, sitting by the fireplace knitting a scarf. This was my family. There was not a drop of blood shared between us, but there was something stronger. There was loyalty. There was respect. These were the people who had built Stone Logistics alongside me. These were the people who cared about Lionel the man, not Lionel the bank account. I tapped my glass with a spoon. The room went quiet. But it was not the fearful silence of last year. It was a warm, attentive silence. "I want to propose a toast," I said. My voice was steady. Last year I stood in this spot and I felt like the poorest man in the world despite my millions. I felt alone. But tonight, looking at all of you, I realize that I am finally rich. Frank raised his glass. To the chairman, he shouted. To the chairman, everyone echoed. I sat down in my chair. The wood felt solid against my back. For the first time in decades, I did not feel the weight of the company pressing down on my shoulders. I just felt the support. I ate my dinner surrounded by laughter. No one asked for a loan. No one asked about the will. We just talked about football and the weather and the old days on the road. It was the best Christmas dinner I had ever tasted. The next morning the house was quiet again, but not empty. I walked out to the garage, which I had converted back into a wood shop. The smell of sawdust and varnish filled the air. It was a clean, honest smell. Leo and Maya were already there. My twin grandchildren were wearing oversized denim aprons that I had bought for them. They were 8 years old now. They had grown so much in the last year. Living with their grandmother in a smaller house had been good for them. They were more polite. They were more grounded. They no longer expected the world to be handed to them on a silver platter. Grandpa Leo asked, holding up a piece of sandpaper, "Is this smooth enough yet?" I walked over and ran my thumb across the piece of pine wood he was working on. It was a leg for a small stool we were building together. "Not yet, Leo," I said gently. "Close your eyes. Use your fingers. If you can feel a bump, the paint will feel a bump. You have to sand until it feels like glass." Maya was working on the seat. She was struggling with the drill. It was heavy for her small hands. "Here, let me show you," I said. I knelt down beside her. My bad knee popped, but I ignored it. I put my large, rough hand over her small, soft one. "Do not force it, Maya," I said. "Let the tool do the work. You just guide it. If you push too hard, you split the wood. It is like life. You have to be patient." She nodded, her eyes focused and serious. We worked for hours. We did not talk about their parents. We did not talk about the scandal. We talked about angles and joints and glue. We talked about how to build something that lasts. When the stool was finished, it was a little crooked. One leg was slightly shorter than the others. It was not perfect. But when Leo sat on it, his face lit up with a pride I had never seen when he opened expensive video games. "I made this," he said. "Yes, you did," I said. "And because you made it, you will take care of it. You will not break it because you know how hard it was to build." That is the lesson I wanted them to learn. That is the inheritance I was leaving them. Not a pile of cash that would rot their souls, but the knowledge that true value comes from the work of your own hands. I looked at them wiping sawdust from their foreheads. They looked like stones. They looked like me. Later that evening, after the kids had gone home, I sat alone in my study. The fire was dying down in the grate. I held a glass of whiskey in my hand, but I did not drink it. I just watched the amber liquid catch the light. I thought about Terrence working on the loading dock in the cold. I heard he had been promoted to shift supervisor because he showed up early every day. He was still paying off his debts. He was still living in a basement. But he was alive. And for the first time, he was real. I thought about Kimberly scanning groceries. I heard she had joined a church group. Maybe she was changing. Maybe she was not. It did not matter anymore. She was part of the past. I turned to the camera in my mind, the one that had been recording this story from the beginning. People ask me why I did it. They ask how a father could be so cold. They ask how I could evict my own blood and watch them fall. I put the glass down on the table. They think family is blood. They are wrong. Blood is just biology. Blood is an accident of birth. Family is a choice. Family is the people who respect you when you are weak and stand by you when you are broke. I stood up and walked over to the replica of the first truck I ever drove sitting on the mantelpiece. I built a company hauling steel. I know about load limits. If you put too much weight on a truck that is not built for it, the axle snaps, the engine blows. I looked at the empty chair behind my desk. For 30 years, I put the weight of my wealth on people who were not built for it. I broke them. I made them weak. Taking the money away was not a punishment. It was a mercy. I took the load off their backs so they could learn how to walk. I picked up the remote to turn off the lights. My name is Lionel Stone. I am a driver. I am a builder, and I am a father, and this chair, I patted the leather back of my seat. This chair is not for sale, it is not for rent, and it is certainly not to be inherited by anyone who has not calloused their hands to earn it. I walked out of the room. The house was dark, but it was not scary. It was peaceful. The chairman has finally retired for the night, and tomorrow the work begins again. I learned that true love is not about shielding your children from every storm. Sometimes it is about letting them get wet so they learn how to build their own shelter. For years, I confused providing with parenting, and I created a monster who thought the world owed him a living. The hardest thing a father can do is close his wallet to open his child's eyes. Dignity cannot be inherited, and respect cannot be bought. The chairman's seat is not a throne for the entitled, it is a resting place for the weary who have earned it through honest sweat. If you agree that respect must be earned, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Terrence sooner, or did I do the right thing by letting him hit rock bottom? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.